Well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to start you off with some satellite data today to keep an eye on those storms that are rolling right up at the top of this larger ridge here. This is kind of that classic ring of fire precipitation setup over this large and dominant ridge that's in the southern plains. And while in the southern plains, we're going to continue to experience incredibly hot temperatures, which at times kind of leak over into the Mid-South and into parts of the Corn Belt here. We will watch the northern edge of this just continue to blow up with big storms like these you see right here. And this one right here in South Dakota, I'm not sure if you saw it last night. I didn't get permission to show into the pictures. I'll ask later today, but some of these were just, absolutely massive rolling through this particular area. Now, this complex of storms continued overnight, moving through parts of, out of South Dakota into Minnesota. And we're watching this morning as they move into Wisconsin. So just as the sun was rising this morning, you can continue to see them here in Minnesota, Wisconsin, parts of Iowa, clipping Illinois as well. So this is our largest complex of storms to kind of be talking about. That doesn't mean there hasn't been rain elsewhere. I'm just keeping an eye on it because the same shortwave that rolled over the top here, which this morning is here, is eventually going to get over into this part of the eastern Great Lakes, eastern Corn Belt, which is where the greatest risk of the severe weather is going to be later today. And one more thing to just take a look at really quickly here this morning is you start to see the smoke throughout the skies here. A lot of this is from Canada, but now we're starting to see more wildfire activity happening in the western United States. And we're just approaching that time of year where wildfire risk really begins to increase a lot. And there's always a concern after a wet winter because of all the new vegetative growth, the grasses that grow, the shrubbery, the small plants that grow up that do dry out in summer, then become kind of the fodder for fires in the west. And so we can see a lot of the wildfire smoke here. I was just keeping a close eye on the latest update from our high-resolution models on where that smoke is going to be coming from over the next couple of days here. And we start to notice more of these fires in Oregon. There's several throughout the Pacific Northwest, as you can see here, but also some wildfire smoke coming out of Arizona, New Mexico, and a couple more in California. So it's just something that we need to be paying very close attention to over the coming days and weeks throughout the western United States. Let's get back to some radar data here. This is an animation over about the last 12 hours. And again, we can see those storms popping right here. We can see the ring setting up here in parts of, the Four Corner states, the Great Basin, just some big time storms here producing some locally very heavy rainfall. But this complex of storms rolling over the top here last night did deliver rain to some very dry places in the upper Midwest. Minnesota, pockets of Minnesota have been extremely dry this entire growing season. Same thing with Wisconsin, So to be bringing in this moisture into these areas, a few storms in Missouri and Illinois, Indiana as well, this is just some critical time for getting some moisture here. One last thing, do note the storms that were rolling up the East Coast. I'm not sure if you saw it yesterday, but there was a pretty amazing picture over our nation's capital of not only a big lightning strike, but also a tornado, a funnel cloud over the top of it. It's just kind of neat to see the nation's capital still in the background of those images. Okay, so last 24 hours of total accumulated precipitation. Again, this was our largest complex of storms rolling through, and that little area right in through there that got that rainfall, absolutely critical to the success of the crops in this region because over the last 30 days, you note that is one of our driest areas. So coming out of the northern plains, out of the Canadian prairie actually, and through this area, there's been some places that have received between 20 and 50% of the normal precipitation. My biggest concern going forward is what's happening throughout Texas, what's going to happen into Oklahoma, what will happen as the heat opens up here across the south, because there are some places that have been extremely wet, and that really shows up well here on this 30-day precipitation anomaly map. But you'd start to note these regions throughout Texas that have been exceptionally dry. I expect this area to go over much more stormy. In fact, I'm worried about the flooding threat that'll be in the Rocky Mountains right in through here with some of these storms. You can also see how dry we've been in the Pacific Northwest, the Snake River Valley, Columbia Basin, I-5 corridor, like the Willamette Valley, the Palouse, then getting down to the whole of the Central Valley of California, which just lately endured quite a bit of heat this past few weeks here. In the southeast, we're still monitoring pockets that are drier, but no major indications of large-scale drought in the southeast. And the northeast has been extremely wet for about the last 45 days. Compliments of a huge ridge that sat here over that very hot water that's developed here in the, just off of like Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, getting out into this part of the Atlantic. It's going to just pump the moisture in, making these storms kind of go north-south rather than just running off from the west to the east. So we're going to continue to see wetter weather in this area as well as we go forward. Okay, just wanted to show you a quick update on the hail because some of these storms last night did put down quite a bit of it. So this is Rain that came is a blessing, but behind it, we have to look and see what the damage was from some of the hail. So there was some crop in through parts of Minnesota and also in South Dakota from that huge supercell here that did unfortunately suffer some damage, and also right here in Illinois as well. Okay, where are we going today? Well, this is the setup. This is kind of our elongated Bermuda high. See it right in through here? So it is kind of got itself set back up a bit, but there's also high pressure that's sitting over the southern and southeastern part of the United States. And that's where the moisture is kind of getting pulled right into this particular area. This is where we're destabilizing the atmosphere later today. You can see the trigger coming through. There's a front, there's an upper level short wave, and that's going to just really begin to increase the risk in this region for the severe weather. So having a look at it, this is our latest update from the SPC, the Storm Prediction Center. Yesterday, they trimmed away the larger area to the south. We kind of talked about why they were going to do that yesterday's report, but now they've really focused in on this section here of Indiana, Ohio, getting into parts of Michigan. And this extends, of course, into parts of Ontario here. And this has been a region that's been hit really hard with severe weather this year. It doesn't show up in the maps because the SPC kind of cuts it off at the U.S. border, but I want to watch it carefully. But you do note that behind it, we have the storms in the Intermountain West. We have storms in the Four Corner States. We've got storms rolling up the plains again. And then as we just go into the day tomorrow, we see this whole region lighting up to the north of the ridge. We're going to keep an eye on that area, and then these storms move into parts of New England. Finally, as we get into the 28th, see this is all the same active corridor that we've been discussing here as being set up for a lot of severe weather. So there's going to be a really high contrast between where it's going to be wet and stormy and where it's going to be extremely dry much farther to the south in this particular pattern. So I will show you the high-res NAM just so you can see it kind of evolve, because I'm concerned later today and tonight about the timing of these storms. We're having to watch them carefully. The timing will be difficult, I think, for the models to come up with. I'll just give you the numbers right now. 8 p.m. Central, this is when they've got this larger squall line coming through parts of Michigan. But the NAM has been good at producing convection, but terrible on the timing. So keep an eye on the radar this entire day in this area. You see the isolated storms here. You can also see them rolling up the plains in this area and possibly, again, cutting through Illinois as well. But what's interesting is that while the model continues to kick this off, some of the other analysis would suggest that these storms may be hard to come by. So we'll watch that carefully in parts of Illinois, Missouri, Indiana late tonight. Getting into tomorrow, that system, that same shortwave we started tracking a couple days ago, makes it into New England. Isolated storm events throughout the Midwest, more throughout the western U.S. here, getting into the Rocky Mountains. And again, we'll keep an eye from there all the way up to Montana as we play this out through the day on Thursday. Could be some big ones coming into Montana, coming out into the plains, working our way later in the week. It's all because of the way this pattern is set up. Okay, we've talked about it quite a bit, but the flow is doing something like this around this larger ridge. And this is just giving us these ridge riders, this ring of fire set up here that just kind of keeps running over the top of this. And unfortunately, it tends to split the country in a major way on who gets the rainfall and who does not get rainfall. And that's why over our next 7 days, we see the map setting up like this. So it's the same corridor we talked about yesterday. You can just kind of see it here as to who gets the heavy precip and who's going to miss out. Some of the newest model runs, though, did more aggressively increase the rainfall chances in here. And they've also expanded the heat a bit farther to the north at times, kind of out of Texas, farther into the southeast, farther here into the Central Plains, and farther into the Mid-South, getting up here into parts of the mid-Mississippi and Ohio River Basin overall. So that's it. I think the WPC's got a pretty good handle on what to expect here. And it lines up pretty well with our latest update from the European model on the probability maps. So this is using the 0Z run. Okay, so some of the rain you see in here was from last night, all right? But this is overall looking at the probability of getting at least an inch of rainfall remaining higher in this area, high into parts of New England, and high north of Highway 16 throughout the Canadian Prairie. Again, I'm watching carefully how these monsoonal rains could cause flooding here in the Four Corner States as well. Despite this not being a full-blown monsoonal setup, that's what we have to keep an eye out on. Texas, unfortunately, just continues to stay very hot and very dry. This is the chances of getting less than half of an inch over the next 10 days, and this is the chances of getting less than a tenth of an inch. And it just, again, shows us that driest corridor right in through this area. Now, one thing I want to point out about these rains farther to the north is let's go take a quick look at what's going on in Canada. I've been showing you these maps the last couple of weeks. We're just looking here at the last 30 days at the percent of average precipitation. So this deepest shade of red here represents an area that has, of course, seen less than half of their normal rainfall. And this is becoming quite problematic because there's only been a few isolated storms that have gone through the Canadian prairie. And this is really kind of putting the crop here a bit in jeopardy. Oops, I'm sorry about that. Let's go back to viewing that. But I wanted to show you over here. There we go. This is how things look, though, in parts of Ontario and Quebec, right here along the U.S.-Canada border where we have good radar coverage. And that is certainly showing the opposite. Some places here more than double their rainfall. So we just need to keep an eye on our neighbor to the north here and the precipitation across their very productive ag lands. From here, I do want to also show you, I have a product. I'll be sure to link it in the notes below. Canada has like we have in the U.S., maps that, where do I have it? Here we go, that show recent precipitation. They have one that they call the Kappa data set, and I plot that every day. I have several maps that just kind of look recently at the precipitation. So I wanted to show you this so you can see, again, you can see the wettest corridor here, isolated storms there, but better precipitation here, British Columbia and Alberta helping to put out some of those wildfires. The one last thing I want to talk about with this precipitation is we are still monitoring very closely what's going on with the Mississippi River. This was the low levels it hit last fall, the winter recovery toward the spring flooding, then the Midwest drought that we saw in May and June, and it's had a very difficult time just recovering beyond that. Now, to keep your eye, I want you to see this is the zero line right here. So this is a river gauge in Memphis. It's on the shore, okay, so it's not out in the middle of the river. So when we look at this, just keep it, I guess, more relative. Look at the position, not necessarily the value. So I just want you to know that we're just a little bit above, about 3 feet above what we call low stage at 0 feet here. And if we have more drier time period, this will quickly drop back down without bringing more moisture to the basin. So this is a top thing I'm watching here for the next several weeks along the Mississippi River, especially as we go toward fall. But if you look out there at the week 2 forecasts, they just continue to be a bit generous with the storms everywhere except for right in through this region. So you see the CPC and the European model roll storms over the top of this for much of the next 10 days. They get into parts of New England. My concern is the Cotton Belt, to be honest. I think it's going to be this area that's going to see too much heat, and it's going to be more limited on the storm activity from now through the next 15 days. So when we start talking about drought developing or flash drought developing across the south, we then get to thinking about, is there anything coming out of the tropics that could possibly influence this? And so this is the latest update. It's the 2 a.m. update. We can see if they got a new update here. Oh, they did. They just got the new 8 a.m. update in. This is Eastern time. They've given a 30% chance to the next wave coming out here. They've reduced the risk of what could have developed right off the Carolina coast and gone out to open ocean. We're watching a wave go through the Caribbean, not expected to move into the Gulf of Mexico. But this just is telling us to where the high pressure is. Do you remember a moment ago I said there's elongated high pressure here and right in through here? Well, this is going to have to roll in between the two given the more dominant high pressure cell that's out here in parts of the Atlantic. So that's what we're expecting coming off of Africa. You probably heard in the news recently that there were some very warm ocean temperatures measured on the southern tip of Florida, 101 degree Fahrenheit ocean temperatures, which I'll need to look into this more, but I believe that's a world record. I want to talk about some other warm ocean temperatures. This is our El Nino graphic. You can continue to see we're bouncing around about a degree C above average. And if we just go have a quick look at what's going on in let's go here to the Western Atlantic. There we are. And you'll notice that there's just a lot of water in this area that is between 80 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit in this region. So we just need to be aware that something can get in here and blow up in a big way very, very quickly. So thinking about high temperatures, we did watch the all hazards map expand on where the heat advisories are right now. So they've now moved a bit farther to the north and farther to the east, all the way here into parts of New England. We're going to keep these temperatures quite hot in certain places where earlier we had seen maybe a better chance of getting some cooler weather. So here it is today, deep into the 90s, triple-digit heat making it pretty far to the north in the central U.S. A lot of heat in New England, above average in the southeast as well. But the only cooler spot is here in the Pacific Northwest into northern California, where we brought in a weak trough at this point. Getting into Thursday, another scorcher here in the midsection of the country. Texas, you keep the heat on for a while, but what I want to keep you aware of is if you kind of come up to this area, about that far north, just watch as it go from Friday into Saturday. You see the heat starts to back off as this front comes in later this week, but it doesn't really leave southern Illinois. It doesn't leave Missouri and Kansas. And of course, it stays hotter than that farther to the south. This is now Sunday into Monday. And look, next Monday, we're still talking about triple-digit heat here, while just to the north of it, it might be up to 20 degrees cooler, just a state or two to the north when you look at these temperatures. That stays on till Tuesday. So this has been a pretty significant change in this area as to the duration of this heat. I should draw that a little better. It's more like this area and to the duration of the heat going forward. So now I'm becoming very concerned about these crops because, as we pointed out, you do note, look in parts of Kansas and Missouri here, this heat's going to stay on in regions that have been very, very dry over the last 30 days. Right now, the latest update from the Climate Prediction Center, they did increase again this region, and I agree with them on where the excessive heat might be through the first week of August, but a lot of this will be across the southern tier of the United States. And going to one of our favorites here, this is the 5-day sliding window of average temperature anomalies. You start to note the depth of the troughs that are coming back here, and that's going to help the ridge retrograde. So what you'll see is that starting in that first week of August, the heat builds back into the west, we get cooler weather or more seasonable weather showing up across a broad area here of the country. Just normal for August, which is already hot in this area. I've got two things left I want to talk with you about. One is going to be what's just happening globally with our ocean temperatures. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I'm still unsure as to whether or not the very warm water that has shown up here in the North Atlantic in the last about 20 days, how this is going to influence the pattern. I was talking with my colleagues yesterday. It's more common that you have cold water here and at the same time a cold water extension there. So we've kind of lost that flavor of the atmosphere. I think this is potentially going to be disruptive later. I don't yet know what it's going to do. But the filling in of the warm water here is going to influence the position of the ridge toward the west. El Nino building is influencing the subtropical jet. Remember, we talked about that yesterday. So there's still a lot of things shifting around here midsummer that are going to help set up this late summer and early fall pattern that we need to spend more time thinking about. I also want to let you know, again, we are keeping an eye over in the Pacific. We've got a large cyclone that's moving into India, a big typhoon that's just here south of Taiwan, and there's another circulation showing up right here that's to the east of the Philippines. And we start to just see this and note where that heavy rain is going to go from. There's one system, there's another. Here's the heavy rain coming into India. And you do notice this is getting up into the North China Plain, potentially causing some flooding issues across, probably right into this area. There's probably 750 million people right in through here that are going to be experiencing 3 to 10 inches of rainfall in the next 10 days because of these two tropical systems. Europe has had some huge severe storms lately. You've probably seen some of the pictures of the big hailstone they found in Italy, but you notice that much of France, Germany, Poland, getting over into parts of Ukraine, Belarus, here into this part of Russia, very, very wet. Same for the UK and the Scandinavian peninsula here. So watch it. Continue to watch it. This is going to be an important thing to see play out as we finish up this fall. And one last thing I want to show you, and I want to keep an eye on this. This map shows the Vegetation Health Index compared to a year ago. So whenever you see these colors like you see here in the plains, that would be making it look better than it did a year ago from space. Of course, we had a massive drought here last year. And then in the Canadian Prairie, this is where it looks worse. That would be the shading for worse. I want to show you the rest of the world, though, because this is the area that I continue to see showing up with some stress on satellite. I'm not getting a lot of reports about what's going on there. But again, that's a lot of corn and beans grown in that area, plus other crops. And we see from space that compared to a year ago at this time, the crop does not look as healthy. So just keep an eye on it. And we'll watch this all together. Tomorrow will be my last video this week. I'm going to take Friday off, celebrating 20 years of marriage with my wife. So we're going to just have a great time. So I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.